All right, today we're diving into the world of environmental cleanup, but the heroes are microscopic, the villains are these invisible chemicals, and the solution? It might just be building, well, tiny cities. Let's dig in.
Okay, let's start with a number. 70 million pounds. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. It's a massive figure, right? Almost hard to wrap your head around. So, what on earth is this?
Well, that's how much atrazine, a really powerful herbicide, gets used in the U.S. every single year. It's actually the second most used herbicide in the country. And look, it's incredibly effective at what it's supposed to do. But that effectiveness, it comes with a pretty serious downside.
So what's the big deal? I mean, why is 70 million pounds of this stuff a problem?
You see, the problem with atrazine is that it just doesn't stay put on the farms. It seeps into the soil, it contaminates the groundwater, and yeah, it makes its way into our drinking water. And we're talking often at levels that exceed what's considered safe. But it gets worse. The impact goes way beyond just contamination. Atrazine is what's known as an endocrine disruptor. It messes with hormonal systems. It's even been suspected of causing developmental problems in animals like frogs. I mean, that's a huge red flag right there.
Okay, so we've got this persistent, widespread pollutant on our hands. The question is, how do we clean it up? Well, it turns out nature might have already come up with the perfect solution.
Get this. At a herbicide spill site, of all places, scientists discovered this special microbe, Pseudomonas sp ADP. Now, this little guy evolved in a super toxic environment, and in the process developed a pretty remarkable superpower. It can literally eat atrazine for breakfast.
So how does it do it? Well, the bacterium basically has this 6-step enzymatic assembly line for dismantling the atrazine molecule. Think of it like a factory line. Each step is handled by a specific enzyme. And the first step, this is the really crucial one, is done by an enzyme called ADZA. It immediately yanks off a chlorine atom, and that's the part that makes atrazine so toxic. So boom, non-toxic right away. Then the next 5 steps just systematically break the rest of it down until all that's left is harmless stuff like CO2 and ammonia. It's a perfect, complete biological cleanup.
So, we found this amazing bacterium. Problem solved, case closed, right? Well, not so fast. Researchers had this idea, this hypothesis. What if we could make these bacteria even more effective by getting them to, work together as a team? See, in nature, these bacteria don't always just float around by themselves. They form these things called biofilms. And the best way to think of a biofilm is like a bustling bacterial city. The microbes stick to a surface, they secrete this protective, kind of slimy matrix, and they build a whole community. This really breaks down the two different lifestyles, right? On one side, you have the lone nomads, what scientists call planktonic cells. They're free-floating, totally exposed, and they have to compete for everything. But then, you've got the bustling cities of the biofilm. Here, they're protected, they can share nutrients, they can even communicate and trade genes. The city life just seems a whole lot safer and more efficient.
And this brings us to the big question for the researchers. The whole point of the study, really. Are these organized bacterial cities actually better at cleaning up pollution than the lone nomads? Now, the logical assumption was, yeah, of course they are. It just makes sense, right?
So the scientists took this question into the lab to prove it. But what they found, well, it was not at all what they, or really anyone, expected.
Okay, so they set up this direct, side-by-side comparison. They measure 2 key things. First, their gene activity, basically how hard their special cleanup genes were working. And second, the actual outcome, how fast the atrazine was disappearing from the water.
And right away, here's the first huge surprise. The genes inside the biofilm city bacteria, they weren't working any harder than the genes in the lone nomad bacteria. At the genetic level, there was no significant difference at all. So much for the simple idea that city life just makes them better workers.
But that wasn't the whole story. Not even close. Because even though the genes weren't working any harder, the actual cleanup process was completely fundamentally different.
Just look at this. The planktonic cells, the lone nomads, they were like sprinters. They just tore through the atrazine, getting rid of all of it in less than 24 hours. A quick burst of speed. But the biofilm, it was totally different. It acted more like a sponge. It first trapped the atrazine in its slimy matrix and then degraded it, slowly and steadily, over many days.
Okay, so this discovery completely changes how we think about where the biofilm's power comes from. So let's zoom out and look at the big picture here.
So, what are the big takeaways here? First, the biofilm's real superpower isn't making each individual bacterium work harder. It's the physical structure of the city itself. And what does that mean for us? It means biofilms are basically a perfect trap and treat system. See, for cleaning up contaminated water in the real world, you don't always want a super fast sprint. Sometimes what you really want is a steady, reliable sponge that can grab pollutants and treat them over time. And that is exactly what you'd want if you were designing, say, a bioreactor for a water treatment plant.
You know, the author of the original thesis on this included a quote from David Foster Wallace, and it just fits so perfectly here. The initial hypothesis was a very intellectual one, right? A more organized community must mean harder-working genes. But the real answer, the breakthrough, came from just paying attention to what was actually happening. The biofilm was acting like a sponge. It was right there in front of them the whole time.
And that leaves us with a pretty fascinating final thought, doesn't it? We so often look for these complex, super high-tech solutions to our biggest problems. But maybe, just maybe, the future of environmental cleanup is hiding in the simple, elegant structure of these tiny, microscopic cities.